Throughout history, certain armies have appeared so powerful, so disciplined, and so far ahead of their time that historians still struggle to explain how they existed at all. Some fought with tactics centuries ahead of their era. Some were trained with methods no other civilization ever repeated. And some were so effective that entire empires feared them. Yet strangely, many of these elite forces did not evolve into future military traditions. They disappeared. Their structures vanished. Their doctrines were forgotten. Their methods were never replicated again, almost as if history itself decided to erase them. Today we are going to uncover 10 elite armies that terrified the world, and then vanished from history. And the deeper we go, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. Because these armies didn't simply fade away. Many of them were removed. Let's begin with one of the most unusual military units ever created in the ancient world. Top 1. The Sacred Band of Thebes. In 378 BCE, during one of the most unstable periods in ancient Greek history, a new military force began to emerge inside the fortified city-state of Thebes. At first, very few outside the city understood what this unit really was. It was small, secretive, highly disciplined, and organized in a way that had almost no parallel in the ancient world. The unit consisted of exactly 300 men, arranged in 150 pairs. But these were not ordinary battlefield pairings. They were not assigned randomly. They were bound by intimate personal loyalty. According to later accounts, the men were chosen not because of noble birth or family rank, but because of physical ability, discipline, and absolute devotion to the person standing beside them. This force became known as the Sacred Band of Thebes, and what made it so unusual was the idea at its core. These warriors were expected to fight not for gold, not for social status, and not even primarily for the state. They fought to protect the man next to them. That emotional bond, reinforced by constant training and military discipline, created a level of battlefield cohesion that shocked the Greek world. Unlike most hoplite forces of the time, the Sacred Band did not rely on seasonal service. They trained year-round, even during peacetime. They were effectively a permanent elite corps in a world where most armies were still made up of citizen soldiers in temporary formations. Ancient writers such as Plutarch described them as an almost unnerving presence in battle. They moved with extraordinary precision. They pivoted formation across broken ground. They struck in coordination, and they refused to break. That reputation became legendary in 371 BCE at the Battle of Leuctra. At the time, Sparta still dominated much of Greece. Its military prestige was unmatched. For generations, Spartan infantry had been treated as the gold standard of ancient warfare. But at Leuctra, Theban general Epaminondas used an innovative oblique formation and placed the Sacred Band at the heart of the assault. What followed changed Greek history. The Theban line concentrated force against the Spartan right. The Sacred Band drove into one of the most feared infantry systems in the ancient world. And for the first time in memory, Sparta collapsed under direct battlefield pressure. The shock was enormous. The defeat shattered the illusion of Spartan invincibility and marked the beginning of a new balance of power in Greece. But what makes the Sacred Band so difficult to explain is not only their success, it is the fact that no other known military force of the ancient world was structured like them. In a culture defined by hierarchy, masculine honor, and rigid battlefield traditions, the Thebans created a combat unit built on emotional attachment and mutual devotion. That should not have worked by conventional logic, and yet it worked with terrifying effectiveness. The unit continued serving as Thebes rose to power, but their final chapter came in 338 BCE at the Battle of Chaeronea. By then, a new force was reshaping Greece. Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, was expanding his control and crushing resistance. At Chaeronea, the Sacred Band faced a Macedonian army that would soon dominate the known world. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. According to later tradition, they fought to the last man. After the battle, Philip reportedly walked the field and, upon learning who they were, expressed sorrow rather than triumph. That detail matters, because even the man who destroyed them seems to have recognized that he had not just defeated another unit, he had wiped out something singular. Centuries later, excavations near Chaeronea uncovered a mass grave believed to belong to the sacred band. The remains appeared to have been buried in paired formation, side by side, a final echo of the structure that had defined them in life. And yet, despite their achievements, their legacy faded into surprising silence. No major military tradition attempted to recreate their structure. No empire adopted their model. No long chain of doctrine carried their methods forward. For a unit so effective, so psychologically unified, and so historically significant, they vanished with astonishing completeness. That may be the strangest part of all, because if the sacred band of Thebes had been treated as a model instead of an exception, the psychology of warfare itself might have developed along a very different path. Instead, they were remembered only in fragments. A unit that should not have existed, a force that broke Sparta, and then disappeared so completely it almost feels as if history itself stepped in to bury the idea. Top 2. The Immortals of Persia. In 480 BCE, during the Second Persian invasion of Greece, Greek scouts watching the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae reported something deeply unsettling. Across the dusty horizon marched a column of soldiers, moving with eerie precision. They did not shout. They did not chant. They did not break formation. 10,000 men advanced in total silence, their spears glinting in the rising sun. To the Greeks, it looked almost supernatural, because no matter how many of them seemed to fall in battle, their numbers never appeared to change. These soldiers were known as the Immortals. They were the elite standing force of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, serving from the reign of Cyrus the Great through the later rule of Darius III. The name itself came from a simple but brilliant system. The unit was always maintained at exactly 10,000 soldiers. Whenever one man was killed, wounded, or fell ill, another immediately replaced him, often within hours. From the outside, it appeared as if the unit never lost a man. To their enemies, it looked as though the army was literally immortal. But the Immortals were far more than a ceremonial guard. They were one of the most sophisticated military forces of the ancient world. Their equipment alone made them unusual for their time. Each soldier carried a composite bow capable of firing with remarkable power. They also carried short spears with iron tips, along with wicker shields that were both light and surprisingly resilient. Many wore scale armor made from bronze or iron plates that resembled overlapping fish scales. This combination created a soldier who was both protected and highly mobile. Unlike the heavy hoplite formations used by Greek armies, the Immortals could fight at multiple ranges. They could launch arrow volleys from distance, then close the gap with spears, and still maintain formation under pressure. Even more puzzling was their strategic role. The Immortals were not limited to guarding the Persian king. They functioned as a mobile strike force capable of operating across enormous distances. Persian records describe them campaigning in Egypt, Central Asia, India, and Anatolia. They traveled with their own engineers, supply units, and logistical support. This allowed them to operate independently from the main army. In many ways, they resembled a rapid response military division, something far closer to modern elite forces than typical ancient infantry. But the deeper mystery lies in how little we actually know about them. Despite their prominence, almost no internal Persian records describing their organization have survived. Most of what historians know comes from Greek historians like Herodotus, along with a handful of stone reliefs discovered in ancient Persian palaces. Their training grounds have never been identified. Their barracks have never been conclusively located. No official military manuals have ever been found. Even stranger, the system used to select their replacements remains unclear. Some sources suggest that replacements came from noble Persian families. Others believe they were chosen from elite tribal warriors across the empire. But many historians suspect that even the soldiers themselves did not know the identities of their future replacements. The structure of the unit was deliberately secretive. Then, almost as suddenly as they appeared in history, the Immortals vanished. When Alexander the Great defeated the Persian Empire in the 4th century BCE, the Immortals disappeared from the historical record. No successor empire continued their system. No later army attempted to recreate their structure. For a unit that was feared across 3 continents, their disappearance is strangely complete. There are no surviving tactical blueprints, no veterans' accounts, no military doctrine built from their methods, only scattered descriptions left behind by their enemies. which raises an unsettling question. If the Immortals truly operated as historians describe, a perfectly maintained elite army of 10,000 soldiers, disciplined, mobile, and logistically advanced far beyond their time, then they represent one of the earliest examples of a permanent professional strike force in human history. And yet the model vanished, as if the knowledge required to build such a system disappeared along with them. The Immortals marched across history like a perfectly organized machine. Then the machine simply stopped, leaving behind almost no instructions for how it had ever worked. Top 3. The Roman Testudo Legions. In 52 BCE, during the brutal siege of Alesia, something extraordinary unfolded on the battlefield. From the fortified walls above, defenders watched as Roman soldiers advanced directly into a storm of arrows, stones, and burning projectiles. Under normal circumstances, such an assault would have been suicidal. But the Roman soldiers did not scatter. They did not raise individual shields in panic. Instead, they moved forward as a single structure. From above, it no longer looked like an army of men. It looked like a moving fortress. This was the testudo formation, a tactic so precise and disciplined that ancient observers struggled to describe it. The word testudo means tortoise in Latin, and the name was perfectly chosen. Roman legionaries locked their large rectangular shields together in overlapping layers. The soldiers in front held their shields forward. Those on the sides protected the flanks, and the men in the center raised their shields above their heads. The result was a tightly sealed armored shell made entirely of human coordination. Arrows struck the shields and bounced away. Stones rolled off the surface. Even flaming projectiles had little effect. The formation allowed Roman soldiers to approach city walls, batter gates, and move under heavy missile fire with minimal casualties. But the true power of the testudo was not its protection. It was the discipline required to perform it. Every soldier had to maintain exact spacing. Every shield had to align with mathematical precision. If even one soldier broke position, the protective shell could collapse. That meant the formation required extreme training and trust between soldiers. And yet Roman legions performed it repeatedly under chaotic battlefield conditions. Sometimes while moving uphill, sometimes under intense missile fire, sometimes while advancing through mud or broken terrain. Modern historians often struggle to understand how such coordination was possible. Roman legionaries carried equipment weighing nearly 40 pounds, including armor, weapons, and shields. Maintaining such geometric formation while marching under attack would have required incredible physical conditioning and drill discipline. But the testudo was not simply a defensive technique, it was a psychological weapon. To enemies watching from city walls, it appeared as if the Roman army had become a single armored organism, an unstoppable machine slowly advancing toward them. Ancient writers describe the terror it created. Missiles that normally scattered armies suddenly became useless. Walls that normally provided safety became vulnerable. The enemy could see the Romans approaching, but had almost no way to stop them. And yet, despite its effectiveness, the testudo presents a strange historical puzzle. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the tactic essentially vanished. Medieval warfare saw countless sieges across Europe and the Middle East. Yet no army ever recreated the Roman tortoise formation with the same level of discipline. Not during the Crusades, not during the Mongol invasions, not during the massive siege battles of the late medieval world. Some historians argue that the tactic required the extremely professional structure of the Roman military. The Roman army was not a temporary force. It was a permanent institution with standardized training, equipment, and command structures. That level of organization simply did not exist in most medieval societies. Others believed the formation demanded such strict discipline that later armies could not maintain it. But there is another possibility. The testudo may not have been just a formation. It may have been part of a larger Roman military system, one that combined logistics, training, psychology, and tactical engineering in ways that later civilizations struggled to reproduce. Even Roman records provide surprisingly little detail. No complete manuals survive explaining exactly how the formation was drilled or executed. Most modern reconstructions come from sculptures, battlefield descriptions, and educated guesswork. It is as if the technique was meant to be performed and witnessed, but never fully explained. If the Roman testudo truly functioned as a moving armored organism on the battlefield, then it represents something extraordinary. An infantry system so advanced that the world needed nearly 2,000 years before comparable coordination reappeared in modern mechanized warfare. A tactical perfection that emerged in ancient Rome and then disappeared with the empire that created it. Top 4 Han Dynasty crossbow divisions. In 202 BCE, during the violent struggle that followed the collapse of the Qin dynasty, witnesses on the battlefield reported hearing something strange. It was not the sound of marching troops. It was not the rhythm of war drums. Instead, a rapid mechanical rhythm echoed across the battlefield, a repeated snapping sound, again and again. Moments later, entire enemy formations began collapsing before they could even reach sword range. The sound came from rows of soldiers operating one of the most advanced weapon systems of the ancient world, the crossbow divisions of the Han dynasty. Unlike traditional archers, Han soldiers were equipped with mechanical crossbows capable of launching bolts with tremendous force and accuracy. Excavated examples from ancient tombs reveal weapons constructed from layered hardwood, bronze components, and powerful tension sinew. Many of these crossbows were capable of striking targets more than 200 feet away with lethal precision. But the true innovation was hidden inside the weapon itself, the trigger mechanism. Archaeologists discovered that Han crossbows used complex bronze locking systems engineered with remarkable precision. These triggers included calibrated release systems, safety locks, and adjustable tension components. Even modern engineers have expressed surprise at the sophistication of these mechanisms. Some crossbows were even manufactured with standardized interchangeable parts. That detail is astonishing, because standardized weapon production is usually associated with industrial societies thousands of years later. Yet the Han Empire appears to have achieved something similar through state-controlled arsenals. Large government workshops produced weapons using molds and strict quality control. Some weapons were even stamped with serial inscriptions, identifying where and when they were manufactured. In other words, the Han military may have operated one of the earliest examples of large-scale standardized weapons production in human history. But the technology alone was not what made these divisions so powerful. It was how they were organized. Han crossbow soldiers did not operate as scattered archers. They fought as coordinated units. Entire platoons would fire in synchronized volleys. As one line fired, another line reloaded. Some soldiers carried large shields, allowing crossbow operators to fire safely behind them. Others functioned as battlefield engineers, repairing damaged crossbows during combat. Historical records also suggest the use of mobile firing platforms, allowing soldiers to shoot from elevated positions or protected structures. Combined with signaling systems and coordinated infantry advances, these crossbow divisions could devastate enemy formations long before close combat began. To enemies unfamiliar with the technology, the effect was terrifying. Bolts arrived faster than traditional archers could fire. The mechanical triggers allowed soldiers to shoot with consistent power and accuracy, and the synchronized volleys created a wall of projectiles sweeping across the battlefield. But perhaps the most puzzling part of the Han crossbow system is what happened afterward. Despite its success, the full structure of these units slowly disappeared from history. Later Chinese dynasties still used crossbows, but never again in the same industrialized and coordinated system that defined the Han military. The complex manufacturing networks faded, the tactical formations were simplified, and the precise mechanical knowledge behind some of the early trigger systems appears to have been lost. Historians still debate why this happened. Some believe the system required enormous logistical support that later governments could not maintain. Others suspect that centralized authorities deliberately restricted such powerful military technology. After all, a weapon system capable of mass production and devastating range power could just as easily threaten the empire itself. Modern tests on reconstructed Han crossbows have revealed something remarkable. Even after 2,000 years, their mechanical designs remain effective. Replicas built from archaeological measurements have demonstrated enough power to pierce wooden shields at significant distances. The technology clearly worked, but the system that wielded it, the trained divisions, the coordinated volleys, the manufacturing networks, vanished almost entirely. If the Han Crossbow Corps truly operated as a mechanized range force in the ancient world, then it challenges the traditional timeline of military development, because it suggests that centuries before the Industrial Age, one civilization briefly mastered the formula for mass-produced precision warfare. And then, for reasons still debated today, that formula disappeared. Top 5. The Varangian Guard. In the year 988 CE, visitors inside the imperial palace of Constantinople witnessed something that seemed almost impossible. Standing behind the Byzantine emperor were towering warriors with pale skin, heavy beards, and massive two-handed axes resting on their shoulders. They wore furs from the frozen north. They spoke unfamiliar languages, and yet they served as the personal bodyguards of the most powerful ruler in the Eastern Roman Empire. These warriors were not Romans, they were Vikings. They were known as the Varangian Guard. Their existence began with an unusual political alliance. The Byzantine Emperor Basil II, facing rebellion within his own empire, needed soldiers he could trust completely. Local generals and nobles could not always be trusted. They had political ambitions, they had family loyalties, they could be bribed. So Basil II turned to an unexpected ally, Prince Vladimir of Kievan Rus. In exchange for military support in a royal marriage alliance, Vladimir sent 6,000 Viking warriors south to Constantinople. These men were hardened fighters. Many had already fought across England, Ireland, and Northern Europe. They were experienced in brutal combat, disciplined in shield wall formations, and feared for their ferocity. But what made them valuable to the emperor was something else. They had no connection to Byzantine politics. Their loyalty could belong only to the emperor who paid them. This made them the perfect imperial bodyguard. The Varangian Guard quickly developed a reputation that spread across the empire. Their primary weapon was the Varangian axe, a massive two-handed blade capable of cleaving through armor and even breaking cavalry charges. Contemporary accounts describe these warriors cutting down enemies with terrifying force. But brute strength alone did not define them. They were highly disciplined. They trained in close-quarters combat, palace defense, and battlefield shock tactics. They protected the emperor during public appearances. They guarded palace entrances. And during war, they served as elite assault troops. In many ways, the Varangian Guard functioned like a medieval special forces unit. Yet the most unusual aspect of the Varangians was their cultural independence. Unlike most soldiers in the Byzantine army, they were allowed to maintain their own traditions. They spoke their native languages, they practiced their cultural rituals, and many continued carving Norse runes into the stone walls and balconies of Constantinople. Some of these runic inscriptions still exist today. Scattered across ancient Byzantine structures, they are silent reminders that Viking warriors once served in the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. Another reason the Varangian Guard became legendary was their incorruptibility. While Byzantine politics was famous for bribery and intrigue, the Varangians were known for refusing bribes. Their loyalty was direct and absolute. They served only the emperor. For more than 3 centuries, the Varangian Guard remained one of the most trusted military units in Byzantium. They fought in campaigns across Sicily, the Balkans, and the Middle East. They protected emperors during revolts and palace conspiracies, and their presence often determined whether a ruler survived a coup. Yet despite their long service, their story ends quietly. By the 14th century, the Byzantine Empire was weakening. Gunpowder weapons were changing warfare, and the old Viking warrior culture that had supplied many of the Guard's recruits was fading. The Varangian Guard slowly disappeared from the historical record. No other empire recreated their model. No later army adopted the idea of foreign elite warriors given direct loyalty to a ruler above all political structures, which raises an interesting question. The Varangian Guard proved that soldiers from completely different cultures could serve an empire with extraordinary loyalty and effectiveness. Their system worked for centuries, yet it was never fully repeated again, perhaps because the model was too unusual, or perhaps because rulers realized that a force powerful enough to protect a throne might also become powerful enough to control it. The Varangian Guard stood outside the normal rules of empire, identity, and loyalty, and for 300 years, they were among the most feared warriors in the medieval world. Then, like many of history's most mysterious military units, they simply vanished. Top 6. The Mamluk Cavalry. In 1260, in the valley of Ain Jalut, one of the most terrifying military forces in history was advancing again. The Mongol Empire had already conquered vast regions across Asia and Eastern Europe. City after city had fallen. Army after army had been destroyed. To many rulers of the medieval world, the Mongols seemed unstoppable. But at Ain Jalut, something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating, a cavalry force rode directly toward the Mongol army. They did not scatter. They did not panic. Instead, they maneuvered across the battlefield with calculated precision. Their cavalry units moved like a carefully coordinated machine. They struck the Mongol flanks. They executed controlled retreats. They lured the Mongols into narrow terrain. Then they closed the trap. The Mongol advance stopped for the first time in open battle. The force responsible for this historic victory was the Mamluk cavalry. What makes the Mamluks so extraordinary is how they were created. They were not born into military families. They were not part of a national army. They were originally slave soldiers. Young boys were taken from regions such as Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. They were brought into the Islamic world and raised inside a strict military training system. From the moment they arrived, their lives were reshaped around warfare. They were trained in horsemanship, archery, sword fighting, and battlefield strategy. Their training was relentless. They practiced mounted combat until their movements became instinctive. They learned how to fire arrows accurately while riding at full speed. They drilled complex cavalry maneuvers repeatedly until entire units could move as one. But unlike traditional slave systems, the Mamluk system produced something unexpected. These soldiers were not treated as disposable warriors. They became an elite military caste. Their loyalty was directed toward the ruling sultan who commanded them. But over time, their skill and influence grew so powerful that they began controlling the political structure itself. Eventually, the Mamluks overthrew their own rulers and established a Mamluk sultanate. Former slave soldiers became kings. For more than 250 years, they ruled Egypt and large parts of the Middle East. Their cavalry tactics were unlike anything else in the medieval world. Mamluk riders combined mounted archery, heavy cavalry charges, and coordinated battlefield maneuvers. They could attack from distance with composite bows, then close in for sword combat. Their armor combined chainmail, lamellar plating, and hardened leather, allowing protection without sacrificing mobility. Perhaps their most impressive ability was their mastery of tactical deception. They frequently used feigned retreats, drawing enemies forward before surrounding them from multiple directions. This tactic was famously used at the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Mongol army was drawn into an ambush and defeated. It was one of the first major Mongol defeats in open battle. Even more remarkable was how the Mamluk system sustained itself. Mamluk soldiers were not allowed to pass their status to their children. Instead, new recruits were constantly brought in from outside regions and trained from childhood. This created a continuous cycle of elite warrior development. Each generation was rebuilt from the ground up. The result was a military structure unlike any other in history, a ruling class made entirely of warriors who had once been slaves. Yet despite their success, much of their military knowledge remains mysterious. Few detailed training manuals survive. Much of their combat doctrine was passed down orally from master to apprentice. Their battlefield coordination, their cavalry formations, and their tactical timing are still studied by historians, trying to understand how such precision was achieved. By the 16th century, however, warfare was changing. Gunpowder weapons and artillery were becoming dominant. Traditional cavalry forces could no longer dominate battlefields the way they once had. The rising Ottoman Empire eventually absorbed the Mamluk state. Their unique military system faded, but their story remains one of the most unusual transformations in military history. A force of enslaved boys who became elite warriors, a warrior class that overthrew its masters, and a cavalry army powerful enough to defeat the Mongols at the height of their expansion. Few military systems in history have been built on such a strange foundation, and even fewer have succeeded as completely as the Mamluk cavalry. Yet, like so many of history's most effective elite forces, their methods disappeared with them. Top 7. The Ninja of Iga and Koga. In 1581, warlord Oda Nobunaga launched a massive military campaign against the mountainous province of Iga in Japan. Nobunaga was already one of the most powerful figures of the Sengoku period, an era defined by constant warfare and political chaos. To crush the small province, he sent an army of nearly 40,000 soldiers. Against them stood only a few thousand defenders. By every conventional measure, the outcome should have been obvious. But what Nobunaga's army encountered was unlike anything they had faced before. Supply routes began burning during the night. Messengers disappeared before reaching their destinations. Ambushes erupted from forests where no soldiers had been seen. Traps were hidden along mountain paths. Enemy troops seemed to appear from nowhere, strike quickly, and vanish into the terrain. The attackers were confused. Many claimed they never saw who attacked them. Yet casualties kept rising. These attackers were not ghosts. They were members of the Iga and Koga ninja clans. Contrary to modern myths, ninja were not magical warriors dressed entirely in black. They were highly trained specialists operating within a unique system of covert warfare. The mountainous regions of Iga and Koga had long been politically independent from powerful feudal lords. Because of this isolation, local communities developed their own military traditions. Instead of focusing on open battlefield combat like the samurai, they specialized in stealth, espionage, sabotage, and infiltration. Ninja were trained from childhood. Their education included far more than combat. They learned disguise, lockpicking, silent movement, climbing, poisons, explosives, and intelligence gathering. They studied regional dialects to blend into different communities. They learned how to travel long distances undetected. They even trained to observe environmental patterns such as wind direction, moonlight, and shadow movement. All of these skills were used to support one purpose: information control and strategic disruption. Unlike samurai armies that relied on direct confrontation, ninja forces often avoided open battle entirely. Instead, they weakened enemies before fighting even began. They infiltrated castles disguised as servants or merchants. They set fires to supply depots. They spread misinformation inside enemy territories. Some ninja missions focused entirely on gathering intelligence about troop movements and defensive structures. In many ways, they function like early intelligence operatives. What makes the ninja system particularly fascinating is its organization. They operated in small cells, each responsible for specific tasks. Some gathered intelligence. Some carried out sabotage operations. Others acted as messengers or decoys. This decentralized structure made the system extremely difficult for enemies to destroy. Even if one group was captured, others could continue operating. Historical documents, such as the Bansen Shukai, compiled in the 17th century, describe many of their training methods. These texts include instructions for infiltration techniques, escape tools, coded messages, and even psychological warfare strategies. Some manuals describe devices such as collapsible ladders, smoke bombs, and flotation tools that allowed operatives to cross water silently. These innovations made ninja forces remarkably adaptable, but their effectiveness also made them dangerous to powerful rulers. When Nobunaga finally invaded Iga with overwhelming force in 1581, the region was devastated. Many ninja were killed. Others fled and entered service under different daimyo, including the rising Tokugawa shogunate. However, the Tokugawa government soon realized that such powerful covert networks could threaten centralized authority. Over time, information about ninja operations was tightly controlled. Their methods were partially suppressed. Their history became distorted by myths and legends. Today, much of what we know about real ninja operations comes from fragmented documents and scattered historical references. The full structure of their intelligence networks remains unclear. But what is certain is that the ninja of Iga and Koga created one of the earliest organized systems of covert warfare and intelligence operations in history. Centuries before modern intelligence agencies existed, these mountain clans had already mastered the art of stealth, sabotage, and psychological disruption. Their influence was so effective that even powerful warlords feared them. And yet, like many of the elite military systems in this list, their true methods faded into secrecy, leaving behind a legend that is far less understood than the reality that once existed. Top 8. The Janissaries of the Ottoman Empire. In 1443, as the massive walls of Constantinople shook under the thunder of Ottoman cannons, Defenders on the battlements noticed something unusual. Amid the chaos of the siege, a disciplined formation of soldiers advanced toward the city walls. They moved in perfect synchronization. Their steps were rhythmic, their uniforms were identical, and their discipline was unlike anything the defenders had seen before. These soldiers were not feudal knights. They were not mercenaries. They were the Janissaries, the elite infantry of the Ottoman Empire, and they represented one of the most radical military systems ever created in the medieval world. The Janissary Corps was established in the 14th century under Sultan Murad I. Their recruitment system alone made them unique. Through a policy known as devshirme, the Ottoman state collected young Christian boys from regions across the Balkans. These children were taken into imperial service, converted to Islam, and trained within a strict military institution controlled directly by the Sultan. At first glance, the system seemed harsh, but within the Ottoman structure, these recruits were not treated as disposable soldiers. Instead, they were educated, trained, and transformed into a professional standing army. From an early age, Janissary recruits were subjected to intense physical and psychological training. They were taught discipline, military tactics, language, and religious doctrine. They lived communally in barracks and were forbidden from forming family ties that could divide their loyalty. Their allegiance belonged only to the Sultan. This created a military force unlike the feudal armies common in medieval Europe. While European kings often relied on temporary forces raised by local nobles, the Ottoman Empire possessed a permanent professional infantry corps. The Janissaries were also pioneers in another area, firearms. By the 15th century, they had already begun using early matchlock muskets on the battlefield. This made them one of the earliest organized infantry forces to incorporate gunpowder weapons into coordinated military tactics. Their battlefield formations combined traditional infantry discipline with the emerging power of firearms. They could hold defensive lines, storm fortifications, and deliver controlled volleys that devastated enemy formations. Their presence played a crucial role in major Ottoman victories, including the fall of Constantinople, one of the most significant military events in world history. But the Janissaries were more than just soldiers. They formed a unique social institution inside the empire. They lived in their own barracks. They had their own internal hierarchy and traditions. In many ways, they functioned almost like a state within a state. For centuries, their discipline and loyalty made them one of the most effective military forces in the world. However, over time, that power began to create problems. As the empire expanded, the Janissaries gained political influence. They began interfering in government decisions. Some even participated in palace coups. The strict rules that once defined the corps slowly weakened. Janissaries began marrying, owning property, and passing positions to relatives. The system that had once ensured absolute loyalty was slowly transforming into something else. By the 19th century, the Janissary Corps had become powerful enough to challenge the authority of the Ottoman Sultan himself. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II decided the institution had become too dangerous to maintain. In an event known as the Auspicious Incident, the Ottoman government violently dismantled the Janissary Corps. Thousands were executed. Their barracks were destroyed. Their military traditions were deliberately erased. The empire then replaced them with a new modernized army. The Janissaries had once been one of the most disciplined and innovative military forces of the medieval world. They pioneered the use of standing infantry and early firearm tactics. Yet their system was ultimately destroyed by the same power that had created it, and like many of history's most effective elite forces, their structure disappeared almost completely, leaving historians to wonder how such a revolutionary military system could exist for centuries, and then vanish so abruptly. Top 9. The Housecarls of Anglo-Saxon England. On the morning of October 14, 1066, a dense fog hung over the hills near Hastings, England. Below the ridge, the army of William of Normandy prepared to attack. Above them stood the defenders of King Harold Godwinson. At the center of the English line were a group of warriors who did not move as the Norman cavalry began their charge. They stood completely still, shield pressed against shield, axes resting on their shoulders. These warriors were not peasants or temporary militia. They were the housecarls, the elite professional soldiers of Anglo-Saxon England. Unlike most medieval armies, which relied on farmers and local levies, raised only during wartime, The housecarls were full-time professional warriors. Their origins dated back to the reign of King Nut the Great in the early 11th century. Nut ruled a vast North Sea empire that included England, Denmark, and Norway. To secure his power, he created a permanent royal guard composed of highly trained soldiers. These men became known as housecarls, meaning men of the household. They lived within the royal court. They were paid directly from the king's treasury, and they served as both bodyguards and battlefield shock troops. What made the housecarls especially feared was their weapon, the Danish axe. This was not a small battlefield tool. It was a massive two-handed weapon that could reach more than 5 feet in length. The blade was wide and razor-sharp, capable of splitting shields and cutting through armor. But the weapon required tremendous strength and precision to use effectively. Historical accounts describe housecarls wielding these axes with terrifying skill. Instead of wild swings, they delivered controlled, precise strikes designed to break enemy formations. The famous Bayeux Tapestry even depicts one housecarl striking a Norman knight's horse mid-charge, bringing both rider and mount crashing to the ground. Yet the true strength of the housecarls was not just their weapons, it was their discipline. They fought in tightly organized shield wall formations, locking shields together to form a solid defensive barrier. Behind the shields, the long axes could strike downward at approaching enemies. This created a formation that was extremely difficult for cavalry to break. At the Battle of Hastings, this formation held for hours. Norman cavalry charges repeatedly slammed into the English shield wall. Many failed. The housecarls maintained their position with remarkable determination. Even when arrows rained down and the battle grew chaotic, the elite warriors held their ground. According to chroniclers, the final collapse of the English line only occurred after King Harold himself was killed. Even then, the last defenders to fall were the housecarls. They continued fighting long after the rest of the army had begun to break. Despite their impressive battlefield performance, the housecarls vanished almost immediately after the Norman conquest. William the Conqueror had no interest in maintaining a military force loyal to the previous king. Instead, he reorganized England under the feudal system, distributing land and military obligations among loyal nobles. This replaced the centralized royal guard with a decentralized network of knights and vassals. The professional warrior class that had protected the Anglo-Saxon kings was dissolved. Their structure, training methods, and battlefield discipline faded into history, which raises an intriguing question. The housecarls represented one of the earliest examples of a permanent professional infantry force in medieval Western Europe. Their model could have influenced the development of later European armies. Yet after Hastings, their system was never recreated in the same form. Instead, Europe moved toward feudal knight armies that dominated warfare for centuries. The housecarls disappeared along with the Anglo-Saxon kingdom they served. But their story leaves behind a fascinating possibility. If their system had survived, professional standing armies might have appeared in Europe hundreds of years earlier. Instead, their discipline and organization were buried beneath the new Norman order, another elite military force that history quietly allowed to disappear. Top 10. The Mongol Heavy Cavalry Archers. In 1241, near the banks of the Sajo River in Hungary, European armies gathered to confront what they believed was a disorganized horde. Knights from across the region assembled under heavy armor. They expected a chaotic cavalry charge from tribal warriors. What they encountered instead was something far more terrifying. Across the open plain, mounted soldiers began moving in wide circular formations. They did not rush forward. They did not collide with the enemy line. Instead, they moved in coordinated waves. Then the arrows began to fall. Not randomly, not sporadically, but in relentless, perfectly timed volleys. Before European knights could even close the distance, their front lines were already collapsing. The attackers were the heavy cavalry archers of the Mongol Empire. To many historians, they represent one of the most efficient military systems ever created. What made the Mongol army so extraordinary was not just their weapons, it was their organization. The Mongol military followed a decimal command structure. 10 soldiers formed a squad, 10 squads formed a company, 10 companies formed a regiment. This system allowed commanders to coordinate thousands of riders with remarkable efficiency. Orders were delivered through flag signals, smoke signals, drums, and mounted messengers. Entire formations could change direction or execute complex maneuvers within moments. This level of battlefield communication was almost unheard of in medieval warfare. But the true power of the Mongol cavalry came from their hybrid combat capabilities. Unlike traditional cavalry, which relied primarily on close combat, Mongol riders were masters of mounted archery. Their composite bows were constructed from layers of wood, horn, and sinew. These bows were incredibly powerful. Many had draw weights exceeding 100 pounds. They could accurately strike targets over 300 yards away. Even more impressive was the fact that Mongol warriors could fire these bows while riding at full speed. This allowed them to attack from distance, retreat quickly, and strike again before enemies could respond. But their tactics went far beyond simple archery. Mongol cavalry units frequently used feigned retreats. They would pretend to flee the battlefield, luring enemy forces into pursuit. Once the enemy lines were stretched and disorganized, Mongol units would suddenly turn and attack from multiple directions. This tactic destroyed many armies that believed they were chasing a defeated enemy. The Mongols also integrated siege technology, engineers, and psychological warfare into their campaigns. They used siege towers, early gunpowder weapons, and even biological warfare, launching infected corpses over city walls to spread disease and panic. Their campaigns stretched across vast territories, from China to Eastern Europe. Despite operating across thousands of miles, Mongol armies maintained remarkable coordination. What makes this system even more mysterious is the lack of detailed written doctrine. The Mongols had laws and military codes, such as the Yasa, established by Genghis Khan. But much of their tactical knowledge was transmitted orally through training and battlefield experience. Unlike many civilizations, the Mongols did not rely heavily on written military manuals. Instead, knowledge passed from commander to warrior through practice and tradition. This makes it difficult for historians to fully reconstruct their methods. When the Mongol Empire eventually fragmented during the 14th century, no successor state managed to recreate the same level of military cohesion. Later cavalry armies adopted pieces of Mongol tactics, but none replicated the complete system. The speed, the communication network, the tactical deception, the logistical coordination across massive distances. All of these elements together created a war machine that reshaped world history. And yet, despite its overwhelming success, the Mongol military structure slowly faded with the empire itself. Their methods influenced future armies, but the full system was never perfectly reproduced. The heavy cavalry archers of the Mongol Empire remain one of the greatest military anomalies in history, a force that combined speed, discipline, intelligence, and psychological warfare on a scale rarely seen before or since. And like many of the elite armies we have explored today, their true doctrine may have disappeared along with the empire that created them. Throughout history, certain military forces have appeared not as gradual developments, but as sudden anomalies. Armies that seem to arrive fully formed, disciplined beyond expectation, organized far ahead of the political systems and technologies of their time. The Sacred Band of Thebes shattered Spartan dominance with a unit built on emotional loyalty rather than traditional hierarchy. The Immortals of Persia maintained a perfectly sustained elite force that appeared to enemies as if it could never die. Roman legions perfected the testudo formation, transforming infantry into a moving fortress capable of advancing through storms of arrows. The Han Dynasty crossbow divisions demonstrated an industrial level of weapon production centuries before the Industrial Age. The Varangian Guard proved that warriors from distant cultures could serve an empire with unmatched loyalty. The Mamluk cavalry rose from slavery to defeat the Mongol war machine and build a ruling dynasty of warriors. The ninja clans of Iga and Koga developed sophisticated systems of espionage and covert warfare long before modern intelligence agencies existed. The Janissaries created one of the first professional standing infantry forces built around centralized training and firearm tactics. The Housecarls of Anglo-Saxon England formed a disciplined royal guard that could hold the battlefield against overwhelming odds. And the Mongol cavalry archers built a military structure capable of coordinating massive armies across continents with terrifying efficiency. Each of these forces achieved something extraordinary. They mastered tactics, discipline, or organization that seemed far beyond the expectations of their era. Yet what is perhaps most mysterious is how many of them vanished. not simply defeated in battle, not gradually replaced by improved systems, but often erased from military tradition. Their structures dissolved, their training methods disappeared, their doctrines were rarely preserved. In many cases, later civilizations had to rediscover ideas that had already existed centuries earlier. This raises an unsettling possibility. History is often presented as a steady progression of improvement, but these elite armies suggest something different. Moments when civilizations briefly unlocked powerful systems of organization and warfare, only for those systems to disappear again. Perhaps they were too difficult to maintain. Perhaps they threatened the political balance of power. Or perhaps the knowledge required to sustain them was simply lost as the empires that created them collapsed. Whatever the reason, their stories leave behind a powerful reminder. Human history is filled not only with progress, but also with forgotten breakthroughs. And sometimes the most dangerous ideas are not the ones that failed, but the ones that succeeded so completely that later generations chose not to repeat them.